Formula E has seen drivers of all kinds of backgrounds and accolades: F1 world champions, DTM legends, X Games gold medalists, and Ma Qinghua. But today, I want to talk about one of the very few drivers who actually managed to win an Eprix, the one and only Alex Lynn. Though many of us know him today as an asset to Cadillac's hypercar programs, responsible for their historic pole position at the 2025 24 Hours of Le Mans, a lot of us can forget that Lynn spent nearly 5 years on and off racing in the FIA Formula E World Championship. And if you remember his tenure at all, you probably only remember his win, how he underperformed at Virgin, and this. So in this video, we'll look back at the full Formula E career of Alex Lynn. Underrated or underwhelming? Alex Lynn was born on September 17, 1993 in Great Dunmow, England, and grew up around motorsport, influenced by his father Sean Lynn, a notable figure in the historical racing scene. After beginning initially in motocross, he transitioned to karting and began to work his way up the open wheel ladder. In 2009, he began racing in Formula Renault 2.0 UK, initially beginning in the Winter Series and winning the UK Winter Cup in 2010. He then raced full-time in Formula Renault UK in 2011, and beat some dude named Oliver Rowland after quite a season. In 2012, he moved up to British F3 International, finishing 4th in points, and raced part-time in other F3 championships. 2013 would be a big year though, as he'd make the jump to full-time F3 Euro and Toyota Racing Series campaigns. In F3 Euro, he'd score 3 victories and end up P3 in points behind his more experienced teammate Rafael Marciello and Felix Rosenqvist. And over in New Zealand, also scored 3 victories and finished P2 in the standings just behind Nick Cassidy. And to cap off the year, he'd win the Macau Grand Prix after leading every lap and holding off the defending winner Antonio Felix da Costa. These heroics naturally caught the eye of influence, and for 2014, Lynn was signed to the Red Bull Junior program and competed for Carlin in GP3. 3 wins later, and he was crowned the Drivers' Champion, and earned himself a test with the Lotus Formula 1 team post-season in Abu Dhabi. 2015 would see Lynn leave Red Bull to sign with Williams as a development driver, and would race in GP2 alongside Pierre Gasly over at Dams. And after 2 victories in Barcelona and Hungary, Lynn would end up in a 3-way tie for P6, winning the tiebreaker over Marciello and crucially his teammate Gasly. 2016 would have to be a big year, but unfortunately the Dams package wouldn't be as strong as some of the others on the grid, evident by Pierre Gasly winning the championship after moving to Prema. Lynn would once again finish 6th in points after scoring 3 victories this season, but with Williams looking towards Lance Stroll, and without another real path into F1, he began looking elsewhere. This is where we finally come to Formula E. In August of 2016, Lynn was one of the 4 drivers to test for the brand new Panasonic Jaguar team, and although he only competed in 1 session, he ended at 6th in the timesheet, incredibly impressive for his first outing. This caught the eye of several teams, including his current GP2 team Renault E-Dams and DS Virgin. And so early in 2017, alongside a partial schedule in the WEC, he ended up signing a deal with DS Virgin as a reserve and development driver, a role that would lead him to deputize for Jose Maria Lopez in New York, with the Argentine driver having to prioritize his Toyota commitments to race in the 6 hours of Nürburgring. And Lynn would steal the headlines by taking an incredible pole position in his very first qualifying session, 3 spots ahead of veteran teammate Bird and taking DS Virgin's first pole of the season. This first race though would be a steep learning curve, as he'd lose the lead right off the start at Daniel Abt, then slip farther and farther back due to his inexperience with energy conservation, and it unfortunately came to a premature end due to a drive shaft failure. The next day, he just couldn't match his race 1 pace and qualified P17, only to have his day cut short again due to a gearbox issue. But that pole position certainly left a lasting impression on the minds of the DS Virgin team, and especially team principal Alex Tye. On September 5, 2017, it was announced that Alex Lynn would replace Jose Maria Lopez and partner Sam Bird to compete full-time in Formula E's 4th season for DS Virgin Racing, and his rookie season would start out fairly solidly. After converting a P16 start to a P8 finish in the first Hong Kong race, and after fighting in the top 5 for much of the second race, Lynn ran out of power on the final lap but still managed to come home P9. He'd start P6 in Marrakesh and was punted off by Daniel Abt on lap 2, but he fought hard to recover and scored 2 more points in P9. He suffered a gearbox failure in Santiago, and having to replace another one after a crash in practice gave him a 10th-place grid penalty for Mexico, but Lynn still fought to take a P10 finish. In Puerto del Este, after qualifying P3, he battled up front for the entire race, and in the late stages was involved in a fun battle between Evans and Rosenqvist for P4, eventually slipping back to finish P6. Unfortunately though, this would be the best result he'd get all season. In Rome, he was forced to retire 15 laps in, had an uncompetitive race in Paris to end up P14, a technical glitch in Berlin dropped him dead last from inside the top 10, only making it up to P16, and he dropped another P16 in Zurich. He'd end out the season with a catastrophic crash in the first New York race, forcing another gearbox change, which earned him a drive-through for the second race, ruining that one as well. And so after beginning the year with so much promise and optimism, Lynn ended it with 17 total points scored, 0 podiums, and a best finish of P6. And well, comparing his stats to teammate Sam Bird's, it was almost unfair. Bird scored 2 wins, 6 podiums, and ran arguably his most consistent championship challenge to finish P3. It was perplexing. Lynn had very clearly shown potential, but had fallen off a cliff for the second half of the season. And even in his first half, a lot of bad luck prevented him from scoring higher finishes that his qualifying performances clearly warranted. Envision Virgin would begin the Gen 2 era with an Audi powertrain, so understandably picked up Audi factory driver Robin Freins alongside re-signing Sam Bird. This left Alex Lynn on the sidelines for the 2018-2019 season. In the meantime, he'd sign up with Aston Martin Racing to compete in WEC, a calendar that wouldn't clash with Formula E this year. And he was incredibly lucky it didn't, as on March 28, 2019, 6 races into the season, the Panasonic Jaguar team would part ways with Season 1 champion Nelson Piquet Jr., following a frankly underwhelming first half of the season, and in the Brazilian's place, Alex Lynn would be drafted in to finish out the last 7 races. It was a fantastic opportunity, and Lynn would be reunited with one of his old Toyota Racing Series rivals in Mitch Evans. In his first outing in the Gen 2 car, he'd initially qualified P9 in Rome, but had his times deleted due to exceeding max power and began at the rear of the grid. Nevertheless, he'd keep his nose clean in a race of attrition and brought it home a solid P12. In Paris, he was taken out by Eduardo Mortara after battling for P11, but in Monaco, he picked up his first 4 points with a P8 finish. In Berlin, he'd start a fantastic P5 and even battled for a podium early in the race. Unfortunately though, an axle failure would force him to retire 23 laps in, a massive disappointment. Byrne would be better with a solid P7 finish to take 6 more points. But it was back to disappointment in New York. In the first race, he qualified P3 and dispatched Wehrlein off the line to take P2, where he'd actually hound race leader Sebastian Buemi for much of the first half. Despite not being able to pull off the move, he kept the Nissan in his sights, and with his energy in check, seemed almost guaranteed to score his first podium. But of course, 18 laps in, his Jaguar would suddenly lose power and grind to a halt, courtesy of an MGU failure. And of course, having to replace his MGU for the second race, he'd start at the rear and serve a drive-through penalty, but was bailed out by an early safety car. From there, he rationed his energy and was able to go on a late race charge to end at P12, which didn't matter as he'd receive a time penalty for exceeding max battery temps. And so after 7 races, Lynn would only score 10 points, leading to a P18 points finish, which in all honesty is still pretty good considering he finished higher than Paffett, Turvey, Lopez, and Dillman, who all ran the full season. If you only take points scored by all drivers in the final 7 rounds, Lynn would have finished 16th. Given the circumstances, I feel like Lynn did a decent job. Having not driven a single lap in the Gen 2 car before Rome, he certainly could have done worse. And once again, many points were lost due to awful luck. He absolutely should have scored a podium in New York at the very least. Meanwhile, teammate Evans didn't have a single technical retirement all season. Speaking of Evans though, he absolutely maximized his 3 years of experience with the team, as well as his work developing the powertrain to take a victory, 3 podiums, and P5 in the driver's standings. But comparing Lynn to the driver he replaced in PK, granted he did run one more race, his stats blow the former champion out of the water, especially given the fact both had 3 retirements. Despite his performance during the second half of the season, Jaguar decided not to promote him to a full season drive as Virgin had, instead opting for one of their development drivers in James Collado. Lynn was once again on the Formula E sidelines in addition to his continued program for Aston Martin and WEC. In January of 2020, he signed as a reserve and test driver for Jaguar. However, this was shortly before the world went into lockdown, so it's unclear how much work he was actually able to do with the team. He raced with them in the FE Race at Home Challenge, if that means anything. But a bit of unexpected news would come out in June as Formula E prepared to close out their season in Berlin. Mahindra's Pascal Wehrlein announced that he would immediately be parting ways with the Indian outfit, cryptically stating, "My interest was to finish the season, but the current situation didn't allow so." It's believed that this was due to his negotiations to join the Porsche team from season 7 onward, but in the meantime, Mahindra needed a driver to finish out the year, and in came Alex Lynn. Thankfully, this time he was able to shake down the car before he arrived at the track, and ran a pretty quiet first race. Well, except for maybe using the pit lane shortcut to gain a staggering 4 places under safety car, finishing P12. The next race though, Lynn would make super pole and qualify P3, but the inefficiency of the Mahindra powertrain would be on full display, slipping farther and farther back as the race went on to come on P11. The circuit was reversed for race 3, and Lynn would once again qualify well in P5. This time, he was able to hang around at the front for a bit longer, but as the stopper in the bottle, there was only so much he could do, and he tumbled down the order late to finish P17. Fortunately, it would be much better from here on out. A P7 start would spark a very competitive race, and although he slipped back again, some great defense work would result in a P9 finish, taking his first points of the year with what may have been a loss of wheel info. Round 10 saw the Brit make super pole yet again, qualifying P5 and held the top 5 spot for over half the race. After losing some ground during the attack cycles, he made it past Neil Johnny late to claim what was, at the time, his best career finish in P5. And during the final race of the season, he qualified 7th and ran a quiet race to finish P8. Once again, I can't help but feel like Alex Lynn, given the circumstances, did an incredibly solid job. In 6 races, he scored points in 3, made super pole in 3, and never once wrecked the car or forced a retirement. In the full season points, he finished P17, ahead of full-time drivers Neil Johnny, Daniel Abt, Felipe Massa, Oliver Turvey, and Nico Muller. Taking the points scored in the last 6 races only, he would have finished 14th in points. Comparing these last 6 races to much more experienced teammate Jerome D'Ambrosio, they stacked up incredibly well, scoring the exact same amount of points, though Lynn was generally the faster driver in both qualifying and in the race. He was actually tied with Robin Frijns for the best average qualifying position out of any driver during these 6 races. This half-season stint, it seemed like Lynn was finally starting to come into his own, visibly showing improvement during the 9 days and making the most out of a technically impaired Mahindra. And finally, he'd be rewarded for his consistency. On November 25, 2020, Mahindra announced the driver lineup for Season 7, and alongside Alexander Sims, Alex Lynn would finally get a full season shot once again. For the first time, he'd be the senior driver at the team, and with Mahindra making moves in the offseason to hopefully help their pace, including hiring former Mercedes high-performance powertrains leader Joseph Holden, the team could genuinely compete for podiums and maybe even the odd race win. For those who don't know, the 2020-2021 season was the closest in terms of overall performance gap in Formula E history, and this was made even closer by the qualifying format at the time. Essentially, almost every driver on the grid got the chance to stand out. Lynn, though, wouldn't start out the year particularly well. In race 1 in Diriyah, he qualified P5 and battled in the top 10 for most of the race, until he was involved in this iconic incident with ex-teammate Sam Bird. This gave him a grid penalty for the next race, and a bad start left him almost last off the line. But all of you probably remember this race for what ended it. As Lynn battled with Mitch Evans late in the race for P16, he dove to the inside, heading into turn 1. Evans moved over to cover, and squeezed the Mahindra into the wall, sending him up and over, where he slid upside down into the barriers. It was an incredibly scary accident, ending the race and sending Lynn to the hospital overnight, though thankfully he was released the next morning without any serious injuries. In Rome, a quiet race 1 saw him starting 13th and ending with a solid P8, and race 2 saw a P16 start converted to a P9 finish, but he received a 30-second penalty for not using all his attack, simply the result of a badly timed late race safety car. But if you think that was bad luck, oh boy. Valencia. Lynn made super pole and qualified P4, moving him to P3 for the rolling start. From there, he fought for a podium position all race long. He lost quite a bit of his third attack mode due to a safety car, which pushed him back a bit, but he was still on pace for a good P6 finish. Then everyone ran out of energy and Nick DeVries won. Lynn was one of the many drivers disqualified and came away from the race with just a single point he scored in group qualifying. The next race, though, would be much better. After making super pole again and qualifying P3, a great start allowed him to move into P2. For well over half the race, he kept Jake Dennis in his sights and managed to save a solid amount of energy. Unfortunately, a slight bump from Norman Nato with around 17 minutes to go pushed him into the gravel and down to P7, but he'd make a late race charge using the energy he'd saved to make it up to P4. And after Nato's penalty, Lynn was promoted to P3 and scored the first podium of his FE career. In Monaco, he'd start and finish P9, while in Puebla, he'd start 16th in race 1, kill Sam Bird again, and finish P10. And in race 2, made super pole to qualify and finish a very solid P6. In New York, he qualified a fantastic P3, but locked up off the start and dropped to around P5. He'd lose more time after having to slow on his first attack mode rejoin, and even more when he was absolutely destroyed by Pascal Wehrlein, giving him damage that pushed him back to P11. The second race would see another solid P9 finish. And with 4 races to go in the season, Lynn sat P17 in points, one spot behind teammate Sims. But as the season was notorious for, fortunes could turn very, very quickly. In front of his home crowd in London, Lynn would rocket to his second career pole position, beating Dennis by almost 3/10 and cleared the BMW off the line. From there, he would lead his first laps and dominate the opening third of the race. With just over 27 minutes to go, he gave up the top spot to take his second attack mode. All he had to do was make sure he stayed close enough to Dennis so that he could retake the lead when he took his attack. Unfortunately though, a slight lockup would cost Lynn almost 2 seconds, and made enough of a gap for Dennis to easily take his final attack mode. Late in the race, he lost P2 to a hard-charging Nick DeVries, and although he still managed to take a podium in P3, it was definitely frustrating to see a victory slip from his grasp.
Yeah, I mean, we have efficiency, we don't have the tyre degradation to keep the race alive for us. So that's the next step we need to take to win races.
So how do you go about making that next step?
Honestly, I've been trying all season, and we all have, so yeah, it's not an easy answer.
Opportunities that good were few and far between for the Mahindra team, and who knew when another one would come? The next day, another one would come. After going fastest in group qualifying, Lynn would make super pole yet again and qualify P3, just 600ths off of pole sitter Van Dorn. He'd lose P3 to DeVries early, but managed his energy well. Unfortunately though, as Lynn took his first attack, Antonio Felix da Costa brought out the safety car and wasted pretty much all of his max power time. This, of course, would be the safety car that Lucas di Grassi would infamously use to leapfrog his way to the front of the field, pushing Lynn down to P5. But as the race went back green, Oliver Rowland barreled into turn 10 and smashed into the side of Stoffel Van Dorn, taking both top contenders out of the fight. So now, with di Grassi under investigation, the battle was between De Vries and Lynn for the win. And with De Vries out of attack, Lynn had the advantage. For the first time in his FE career, he had one fan boost for this race, and he used it to great effect, activating it down the main straight and sweeping past the Dutchman into turn 1. From there, it would be defense. Although De Vries had previously been the faster car all weekend long, Lynn would not back down.
Because Lucas di Grassi comes up through the final corners. He's in the head of the race, but he's been black flagged. So it's Alex Lynn, the man from Essex, in his home race, who comes out of the final corner and takes his first Formula E victory. Alex Lynn takes the win. Dilbach Gill dancing around, and at the end of one of the most mad and dramatic E-Prix we've had in the last 7 years, it is Alex Lynn for Mahindra who takes the win.
Alex Lynn is Dario on TV. I said I was going to talk to you when you won a race. Well done.
Oh, he was struggling a bit, to be honest. I hope you got tears in your eyes as well, mate. Fuck.
It was an emotional affair for both Lynn and for Mahindra, who had won their first race in Season 4, and as of December 2025, this is their latest win in Formula E. At the time, it set the record for most Formula E starts before a first win, which was recently broken by Dane Ticktum in Jakarta. And in classic Formula E Season 7 fashion, Lynn emerged from the weekend 6th place in the driver's standings, just 17 adrift of leader Nick De Vries, and now, shockingly, a key championship contender. This, though, meant that heading into the final doubleheader weekend in Berlin, he'd be sorted into qualifying Group 1, putting him at an extreme disadvantage, forcing him to qualify P21 for Race 1. And after making it as high as 14th, he made a late pit stop to finish P20. So much for momentum. Nevertheless, he was still technically championship eligible, though was still 17 back to De Vries. And well, a 14th place start and 13th place finish wouldn't exactly be an awe-inspiring way to end out the year. And so, with Season 7 wrapped up, it was an incredible year for Lynn. A win, 3 podiums, a pole position, 7 Super Pole runs, and a P12 points finish. Ahead of names such as Audi's René Rast, Nissan's Oliver Rowland, Envision's Nick Cassidy, BMW's Max Gunther, and Porsche's Andre Lauderer. And up ahead, he was just a point behind Wehrlein, 2 behind Verne, 4 behind Van Dorn, and 6 behind Acosta. He very easily could have scored higher had certain races played out his way. Every point this season mattered. But more importantly, he certainly outperformed his teammate Alexander Sims. More podiums, more Super Pole runs, a much better average start and finish. And although he only outfinished him 8-7, he outqualified him 11 times. Lynn was finally the number 1 driver at the team. He'd finally broken through and scored his maiden victory, and he finally seemed to be in an organization that valued him as a driver, that wanted him there, and that would provide him with the stability and support he needed to challenge for a Formula E World Championship. Except that he wasn't. On June 23, 2021, the week following races 8 and 9 in Puebla, the race reported that Oliver Rowland was set to leave Nissan following the season's end and join the Mahindra team. It was quite a big move at the time, stemming from Rowland's disappointment in the team's Season 7 upgrades. But it shocked many who believed that Mahindra had finally developed a solid driver lineup. At the time, no decision was made on which driver they'd retain for 2022. Lynn was taken back a bit by how early Mahindra had made this decision, and began talking with other teams. Apparently, he was on Nissan's shortlist of drivers, alongside Lucas di Grassi and their eventual choice Maximilian Gunther, but in the end, he chose to step away from Formula E and focus fully on the brand new opportunity he was about to begin with Cadillac in their hypercar program. He stated the following to eFormula News: "I had the opportunity to continue in Formula E, but I wanted to develop my career in a different direction and fight for overall victories in the big races, like Daytona, Sebring, or Le Mans. I think every driver is looking at the LMDH and hypercar categories for the future. Deep down, I'm a romantic when it comes to motorsport. I loved racing in Formula E, but that motorsport romance, and there's plenty of it in America, really appealed to me. I wanted to compete for those big, prestigious trophies." Alright, I'm gonna be completely honest with you. I began writing this script fully expecting to title this video something along the lines of "The Underwhelming Career of Alex Lynn," or "The Disappointment of Alex Lynn," because from what I remembered, that's what he was. Having just watched all of Season 4 for my review, his subpar stint at Virgin was fresh on my mind, and I had very little memory from his partial seasons with Jaguar and Mahindra. Really, all I remembered was that London weekend in 2021. But there was so much more to Alex Lynn's story than I expected, and dare I say it, he was definitely a bit overlooked. Yes, that first season was awful, and he probably did deserve to be replaced at Virgin, but I thought he did decently in his 7 races for Jaguar, but had some truly awful luck prevent him from really standing out. Nevertheless, he performed better than Nelson Piquet Jr. did at the time, and honestly deserved a full-time race seat for Season 6. and when he didn't receive it and went to Mahindra instead, once again, that partial season really impressed me. It's so much harder to just jump into a car halfway through a season and immediately get the most out of it. And Lynn did take a few races, but by the end of the season, I'd say he was doing incredibly well, outperforming Jerome D'Ambrosio, and certainly proved Jaguar wrong by outperforming James Collado in a car that definitely wasn't the greatest. Then, 2021. Dare I say he was one of the most underrated drivers of the season. I mean, 3 podiums is more than Dennis, Frines, and Vern scored. He showed good speed in multiple races this season, again held back a little bit by the Mahindra not having the greatest race pace, but that London weekend was almost picture perfect. And had he not locked up when he was behind Dennis, he very easily could have swept both races. The fact of the matter is, outside of season 4, I wouldn't say Lynn ever got a real chance in a reliable race-winning team. When he raced for Jaguar, he had 0 prep time and that car was anything but reliable for him. When he raced for Mahindra, it may have been reliable, but wasn't necessarily one of the quicker or more efficient cars on the grid. It was a crime that he was kicked to the curb after season 7. But I am glad that he didn't make the move to Nissan. Season 8 for them was, rough to say the least. In the end, that chapter of Alex's life is closed, and the one he's currently in, he seems to be enjoying. His brief foray into Formula E was decent, and one I think definitely deserves a little more respect. But well, that's all I have for you today. Thank you all for watching, and let me know below what you thought of Alex Lynn's Formula E career and how you think he could have done had he been given another top tier seat. I'll see you all in the next one.